You're watching The Legal Breakdown. So Trump is forcing his attorneys to turn the jury against him in a major misstep by the guy. But first, for those watching right now, just a reminder that Glenn and I are going to be doing daily comprehensive coverage of the entirety of Trump's first criminal prosecution in Manhattan. So for those watching, if you want to follow along, please make sure to subscribe to both of our channels. Okay, Glenn, talk about what Trump is doing that is screwing himself over with the jury.
You know, Trump is not only trying to micromanage his own lawyers, he is depriving them of putting on his best defense. Donald Trump, in a word, is screwing himself. There was a great headline just that popped up in the New York Times, and it reads, "Trump, venting about his lawyer in his criminal trial, seeks more aggression." Why is this important? Because ordinarily, defense attorneys are the ones who get to make the tactical choices about how to defend a case, what witnesses to call, more importantly, what witnesses to decline to call, how to cross-examine the prosecution witnesses. People might not realize, Brian, those are not decisions up to the client. Those are decisions up to the lawyer. The client gets to make decisions like whether he wants to plead guilty or not guilty, whether he wants to accept the plea offer, whether he wants to testify in his own defense or not. But otherwise, the attorneys are supposed to have free rein to make the tactical choices about how to try a case with input from the client. But Donald Trump, behind the scenes, there's some great reporting by the New York Times, has been sort of endlessly complaining about how his lead lawyer, Todd Blanche, is not following his instructions and is not being aggressive with the witnesses, and Donald Trump is reportedly furious. And there is one way in particular that I can see this is really going to come back to haunt Donald Trump. Donald Trump has never admitted that he had any relationship or any sexual encounter with Stormy Daniels or with Karen McDougal. Brian, I don't know about you, but when I watched the Anderson Cooper interview of Karen McDougal, she was pretty darn compelling, credible, convincing. She, was pouring her heart out about how she was in a 10-month relationship with Donald Trump. She talked about where they traveled and how they exchanged gifts. She talked about how she was in love with him and he said he was in love with her. Donald Trump, it looks like, is instructing his lawyers to go hard after her, call her a liar, and what that will end up doing is really alienating Donald Trump and his legal team in the eyes of the jury. Because, I think the prevailing wisdom is he had a relationship with Karen McDougal. He had an encounter with Stormy Daniels. And given that Trump is causing his attorneys to pit him against those two women and essentially instructing his lawyers to go scorched earth after them, that is going to backfire. That is going to make the jury look at Donald Trump and think, you can't even admit to relationships that are pretty darn obvious. There was a famous lawyer who used to say in similar circumstances when he was representing clients who did wrong, and it was in their tactical interest at trial to admit they did wrong, he would say, you know what, ladies and gentlemen, my client may have violated the good book, but he didn't violate the law book. But Donald Trump is refusing to let his attorneys concede anything. That is a tactical blunder.
Glenn, in our previous episodes, we've spoken about how prosecutors, in their opening statements, you called it draw the sting. So basically, they show the weak parts of their case right up front so that they don't get hit with it later on. Why would Donald Trump keep this as something that's going to be a burden on him and his case? Why wouldn't he just front the sting for himself and then kind of allow this to just, especially given that this is an obvious point. So why undermine his own credibility by denying what's obvious right off the bat?
I think for a couple of reasons. One, Donald Trump is all bad tactical choices all day long. He may be able to fool his gullible supporters, but he is not going to be able to fool a jury. He's not going to be able to fool a judge once, this case is in a court of law, which is where it now is. And Donald Trump's mantra is concede nothing, admit nothing. Where's my Roy Cohn? I need somebody to fight and go hard and be nasty and go scorched earth after everybody, regardless of how it might alienate the jurors. Donald Trump is not interested in pleasing the jurors. In fact, there's a really telling passage in this New York Times article where Donald Trump behind the scenes is telling his loyalists, it's not only that Todd Blanche is not being aggressive enough, and it's not only that he's not following my instructions about how to try this case, but he's not attacking the witnesses, he's not attacking the jurors, and he's not attacking the judges. You know what? Talk about a bad decision. If you attack the jurors who are going to decide your case, if you attack the judge who is going to sentence you once you're convicted. Again, Donald Trump is nothing but bad tactical choices, but he will never admit anything. That, in part, will end up being his downfall in this trial.
Well, it seems like he's kind of already conceded defeat as far as the trial is concerned. So at this point, is he just trying to prime his base into believing that the whole thing was rigged, and so he's just trying to color the entire trial as being, against him, whether it's judge, jury, defense, whatever it was?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, because just as he has never admitted he had relationships with these women, I think he must, I don't want to look inside Donald Trump's mind, but I think if he were to now say, okay, it's in my tactical interest to admit these relationships, because remember, these relationships have nothing to do with whether business records were falsified.
Right.
These women have nothing to do with the falsification of business records. So Donald Trump could easily say, okay, I did have a relationship with them, but I'm not guilty of the charged crimes. But I think Donald Trump's calculation is that even if it was the right tactical choice to make in his trial, he will never say, you know what, I told a bunch of lies when I said I was never in a relationship with Karen McDougal and I never had anything to do with Stormy Daniels, because then he can no longer be the victim. He can no longer convince his supporters to keep sending him more money, because now he's admitting that he's a liar and a wrongdoer, even if all of that would help him perhaps win a criminal trial.
Right, the only option for him in his eyes right now is to just keep the con going. And so he's already told one lie, and so now he just has to keep these lies going, because as soon as he concedes that he lied at some point, then he feels like his credibility is going to be shot. But what he doesn't realize is that by virtue of lying about something that everybody can see is obvious, like the fact that you had an affair with Stormy Daniels and Karen McDougal in the first place, you are hurting your own credibility by digging your heels in on something that we can all see is false. You're basically saying the sky, the sky isn't blue. The sky isn't blue, and everybody, all you have to do is look up to see that it is, but he's just, convincing himself that it's not, and hoping that by virtue of sheer repetition or power of manifestation that he's going to convince these people of something that they can see is not real.
All he has left is his ever-dwindling base and the money they are willing to send him.
Right.
And if he gives up the con and he loses them, he's got nothing left. So maybe this is the only play that Donald Trump thinks he still has.
Glenn, is there a world in which Todd Blanche can defy Trump, or is he going to have to basically just try this case poorly on purpose because he's at the mercy of his client?
Yeah, I think it exposes the weakness of the lawyers that Donald Trump chooses and the lawyers who are willing to represent him. What Todd Blanche should do is say, Mr. Former President, Mr. Defendant, I make the tactical decisions. I am going to defend you so that you have a fighting chance at perhaps winning an acquittal or a hung jury. But Todd Blanche is not up to that task. It looks like he is kowtowing to, a really difficult client to manage, and he is not trying a smart, savvy tactical case. That is, I think, an abdication of the responsibility a defense attorney has to zealously represent his client. It's not to appease the client. If the client wants you to take a position that you know will undermine and undercut your client's chances of winning, you stand up to your client, you represent him zealously, you do the right thing, and you let the chips fall.
Glenn, once you lose the jury, how hard is it to get them back?
There's no getting a jury back once you lose them. Once the defense attorneys start attacking Karen McDougal and Stormy Daniels, when I think people will be able to assess that they're telling the truth, not only because I think they're going to come across as credible witnesses sort of in and of themselves, but we've already heard some of the corroboration. We've heard about how Stormy Daniels and Karen McDougal's phone numbers were virtually in Donald Trump's Rolodex at work, and yet he had no relationship with those women. So they're going to be corroborated, and when they are under attack because they'll see that the defense attorneys are doing Donald Trump's bidding and trying to deny the obvious at the expense of these women and their credibility, it's not going to sit well. If he's not already lost the jury, he will lose the jury. And once you lose the jury, once the jury sees the defendant for who he is, there really is no turning back.
Yeah, but I gotta ask, do the same rules apply here? Because Donald Trump was just found liable for sexual assault and defamation. Everybody knows that he's gross, so isn't that baked into the cake with him? Like, can you lose a jury for being disgusting if the baseline is already that you're disgusting?
Maybe the jurors, don't know enough about Donald Trump to reach the conclusions that most people who have followed the news and followed what Donald Trump has said and done over the years, they have already reached the conclusion that, if his lips are moving, for example, he's lying. But here's the thing. Those jurors took an oath to sort of set aside their preconceived notions, their biases, their preferences, their ideology, their political affiliation, and decide the case based only on the evidence they see introduced during the course of the trial. And they are to presume Donald Trump to be innocent of these charged offenses. Of course, they don't have to presume Donald Trump is a decent human being or kind of pretend like he's some kind of a saint. They just have to presume that he's innocent of the charged offenses unless and until the government's evidence proves guilt beyond a reasonable doubt.
So they'll presume that he's a decent person because they'll give him the benefit of the doubt until the moment where they, allow, like 3 days into this trial where we basically see exactly who he is all anew. It goes to show that anytime you have the opportunity to actually learn who this guy is, even if you do give him the benefit of the doubt, it's really going to ultimately circle back to exactly who he is. I mean, he's not going to be able to hide who he is, even in the instance where he's actually helping his attorneys prove to the jury exactly who he is. So any way you cut it, it's not going to help the guy. Again, with that said, for anybody watching right now, if you want to follow along with Glenn and I as we continue to cover this trial on a daily basis, please make sure to subscribe. The links to both of our channels are right here on the screen. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.